Ahoy, this is David Perry with our continuing series of interviews with friends and colleagues from around the world, talking about how we get from the great pause of this year of COVID into the great return. And I'm very pleased to have a new friend with me, someone who loves travel and the cruise industry as much as I do. Please welcome, speaking to us from Sydney, Australia, where it is tomorrow for him. Welcome, Paul Nisted. Welcome.
Good morning, David. It's afternoon for you, I know.
Yes, exactly. So tell us a little bit about your career in travel. I know you were flying those big, wonderful jets of Qantas for many years. So you are someone who loves travel by land, sea, and air.
And absolutely. It was a fantastic job, absolutely fantastic. 27 wonderful years. And as you can imagine, got to know quite a lot of places very well, but not everywhere in the world because, there are a lot of cities we didn't fly to. So there are some cities around the world I'm very, very familiar with. And of course, lots of areas of the world that I didn't see at all. So I tried to fill those gaps in my vacations and more recently, covering areas that cruise ships go to, which take you to places that you wouldn't normally even think of planning a holiday to. Places like Central America, which is just so remote for us, difficult to get to, expensive. If you do it by cruise ship, you get a taste of it, and that fills in those sorts of gaps. So cruising for me has been a wonderful opportunity to travel the Baltic, travel South America, down the African coast, leisurely, beautifully, comfortably, and getting a real taste of somewhere foreign and exotic.
Now, when you retired from Qantas, you didn't really retire. Someone who loves travel like you had to do something. So I understand you started working with the Port of Sydney, a place I know well. I've been to Sydney several times. Absolutely one of the most beautiful sail-ins in the world. I think there's only two others that come close, and that would be Hong Kong, which is very different, and Venice, completely different. But to me, the glory of sailing into Sydney is, first of all, you approach Australia and it's like a big bite has been taken out of the planet. And you sail into this very rural area, you turn left, beautiful farmland, and suddenly you turn that corner and there is Sydney and the Opera House and the bridge. Truly one of the most dramatic sail-ins in the world. And you worked for the Port of Sydney. Tell us about that.
So there are two companies that handle between them all of the cruise ships that visit Australia. So I'm very fortunate that I have been working for both of those companies. It's what they term a casual job here. The season is basically 6 months long in Australia. From the ships usually start coming down this area at the beginning of October, and by mid-April they've all left and gone back to the Northern Hemisphere. So that gives us 5-6 months. And as a casual job, you can do as much or as little work as you like, as long as you do your rosters and you work out when you can work. And they have a large team of casuals, and it's fantastic. It's a good day. We do start at 6 o'clock in the morning, sometimes 5:30 in the morning to do the debark, that whole operation. We then have a very quick turnaround to start bringing the fresh people on. And usually the days are over by about 6 o'clock in the evening. So it's a long day. It's a long day on your feet. It's a long day smiling and directing people in the right direction. And altogether, it gives you a little taste of something exciting going on with lots of foreign visitors, of course, to Australia. Lots of Americans. Chinese market has been huge for cruising. So, lots of people to deal with on a big day. The Ovation of the Seas has been the biggest ship that comes here. So that's a day when we're taking 5,000 people off in the morning and putting 5,000 people back on in the afternoon. So that's a big day.
As someone who has worked aboard ship for almost 2 years, went around the world 2.5 times as a junior hotel officer aboard the beautiful Crystal Symphony, people would ask me, well, when do you have a day off? I'm like, you don't understand. There are no day offs when you work on the ship. And then there are 2 days which are 48 hours long within a 24-hour period. And that's embark, debark. So I know a little bit, more than a little bit about what you're talking about. So from your love of travel, when you retired you decided to see the world by ship. and you've taken, I think you said 15, 16 cruises.
Yeah, 15 cruises. I think the last one was our 15th. I started doing them in vacations before I left flying. The first one we did was a Baltic cruise through all the major Scandinavian cities with an overnight in St. Petersburg. And that was fantastic. So we were reluctant cruisers at first. We sort of thought it wouldn't be for us. And we really didn't know what to expect. And we absolutely loved the whole experience. So we've done a wide variety of big ships, not the huge ones. We've avoided those, but and some small ships as well. And without exception, it's all been a fantastic experience until the most recent one, which is
well, and that you
today.
jumped into my segue. You know, I like to say that Friday, March 13th, 2020 is probably one of the more notorious Friday the 13th since the original one when the Templars were knocked out by the Pope and the King of France, which gave us the myth of bad luck being associated with Friday the 13th. But right around the time of Friday, March 13th, 2020, where were you? And take us through the entire story, because you were one of the last people to be at sea as COVID swept over the world. And we have some sketches that you took that I'm going to roll in a little bit.
Yeah, I think we were in fact the last ship to get to Miami, to Florida. There were a few around us that got in a little bit before us. A lot got back well before us. So we were rounding the Cape.
And what ship, just before we start, what was the name of your ship?
It was the Coral Princess. So I think passenger-wise, that's about 2,600, something like that. So medium size. It was a beautiful ship. It had been refurbished in January 2019. It was beautifully appointed on board. The crew were wonderful. They were very industrious with their cleansing, with the washing of the hands, all the way through from the start. We set sail on the 5th of March from Santiago. So the first half of, we didn't realize at first that we were actually on a back-to-back. So that the first cruise went from Santiago to Buenos Aires, and then the second cruise was going from Buenos Aires to Fort Lauderdale. But we had booked the whole journey. So it was supposed to be a 32-day cruise for us. So we set sail from Santiago. Things were normal. I won't say we were nervous. We'd been in Santiago for a week. And by the time we got on board the ship, there were 2 cases that they announced in Chile. And it had just started in America. It hadn't, I think Washington State, if I remember rightly, was the first area to start showing a few cases. There was no mention of the word pandemic as yet. Countries were getting a little bit nervous. And when we checked in, we were a little surprised that there were no temperature checks for getting on the ship. We just simply filled in what had become a standard form in the last few months before that, where have you been in China? Have you got any symptoms? And it was just a form, tick the box, sign it, hand it in. So we were we got up early because we were sailing around the Cape. So we'd left Ushuaia the afternoon before in Tierra del Fuego, and we woke up early-ish. It was actually, I think it was the 12th when we got the message. It was, we were sailing around the Cape. We were on our balcony looking at what is basically a rock, flat ocean, beautiful weather. It was going to be a beautiful day. It was cold. And we had what we came to dread, which was the ding dong in our cabin, which meant the captain was about to make an announcement to everybody throughout the ship. That was the first time that had happened, but it happened a lot after that. And we learned to dread those ding dongs. So he said, I want everyone to turn on their television. We've just loaded a video from the CEO from Princess, and you need to watch this. And that's where the CEO announced that they were shutting down the business and returning all ships to the most convenient port. So there's no point going back to Ushuaia. No one can fly out of there. So they said to us that we will head straight for Buenos Aires, which was where the first part of that cruising was going to end anyway. So we were told to make plans for flying out of Buenos Aires on what was supposed to be the 15th originally. And then as the day progressed and into the evening, we were watching the map on the television. And because our next port was supposed to be the Falkland Islands. And the little arrow, which represented our ship, kept heading east. It didn't turn the corner and head up to Buenos Aires. And no announcement, no discussion.
And at this point, what was the mood aboard ship? I mean, were people cramming the shore excursion desk, trying to make flight arrangements and whatnot?
Absolutely, because they did say to us, if you have flights out of Buenos Aires, you will be able to get them. If you haven't got flight arrangements, please make them. If you can't do it yourself, come down to the desk and we'll help you. And anybody who had booked their flight through the Princess system, which the majority hadn't, you need to get your own flights. So there was a lot of us. I mean, I had my iPad. We did a lot of work securing flights. And as it happened, to give a brief summary, during the next week to 10 days, we racked up $20,000 worth of fares on 4 different flights as things changed and as we were unable to make them. And at each point, they said, make your own bookings, make your own bookings. And we were, of course, as time went on, anxious to get off.
Yes.
And they did tell us that you will be able to get off when we get to Buenos Aires. You will be able to get off when we get to Montevideo. You will be able to get off when we get to Rio. And at each point, that failed.
And so when you saw the arrow heading continually east, at what point did you realize we're not going to the Falkland Islands?
I don't think we got an announcement. We just simply had an arrival time on the screen of the next morning for the Falkland Islands. And they did say at some stage that they had decided, after that announcement where they were sending all the ships back by the 15th, they had decided with our cruise that they would continue the cruise as normal and arrive in Buenos Aires on the 18th, which was our expected arrival date. So we had our day on the Falkland Islands. A day with the penguins. It was freezing cold. It rained a lot, but it was an adventure. And we thought, well, we're still on holiday. We'll make the most of it. But we had this thing hanging over us.
And was anyone scared of people being sick on board? Was there this sense of dread on board, or just anxiety?
Not at all. Not at all. It was business as usual for everybody. No one seemed to be discussing much. It was more a discussion of, well, when are we going to get there? And I think people thought, well, we'll just make the most of it until the 18th. We weren't nervous until after we left the Falkland Islands, we were heading for Puerto Madryn. So the first stop after that was on the coast of Argentina. As we approached, we had word that they were not letting us in. So that's when we all started to think, okay, this is getting serious. We've been banned from the next port.
And was this a ding dong in your room?
Yeah. So then we were sailing and going up the coast. And the next port was Montevideo. That was the next scheduled stop. And as we approached, we became stationary out at sea. Basically, we were not moving anywhere. And then we heard that Montevideo had said, no, you can't come in. So the next question from all of us was, well, is Buenos Aires going to let us in? So we were sitting in the mouth of the river, stationary, waiting for decisions. So, and I do understand that decisions took a long time to be made.
So you were already in the mouth of the River Platte?
Yep. And we knew that the captain was not responsible for making these decisions. He had to negotiate with headquarters and, for Princess, get his instructions, and they were dealing with various governments and various rulings that were coming in. So all of this took a lot of time. End result of all that was we, as a condition of our arrival into Buenos Aires, we all had to have a temperature check. Now, to do that for 2,500 passengers and 1,000 crew, it took all day. So they were very well organised. They did it deck by deck, left-hand side, right-hand side. And we were called in our room to come down, not to use the lifts. We were directed all the way down the stairs through the medical centre where they'd set up several booths or little offices that we could move along. So it was very efficient. And they just did the temperature check, on the forehead of the reader. And at the end of that, they said, we are a healthy ship. No one on board is sick. So Buenos Aires said, all right, you can come in. So we got in. We were supposed to get in the morning of the 18th. It took so long for the pilots to arrive, for decisions to be made, that we ended up getting into the port at 3:30 in the morning, the next morning.
Yes.
Our first flight had been for that night. That was the first booking we'd made. And when before we pressed the button to say, yes, we'll have that flight a few days earlier, I went down to the desk and said, if we get in on the 18th, we can get off on the 18th. He said, absolutely, absolutely you can. So we went ahead and booked those flights. So once we knew we weren't getting in on time, we had to change those flights, which was a case of cancelling and rebooking. So we then we couldn't get anything to Australia for the 19th, so we booked for the 20th with a guarantee that we would be there for 2 days while everybody got off. The reason they made that decision, and I sort of understand it, the reason they made the decision to get us in on the 18th was that's where more than half the passengers were getting off anyway. Mm-hmm. They could then get their normal commercial flights as booked. This is what Princess were hoping.
Yes.
And that would solve a huge problem for Princess. And all they would be left with is the people who are supposed to be then going on to Miami. So that's why they didn't head there for the 15th, because then they would have had to deal with flights for everybody.
Yes.
So it was a commercial decision as much as anything. Long story short, 19th, quite a lot of people got off the ship. They were taken by police escort in buses to the airport. Our view was we were at a very ugly bit of the docks down by cranes and things. We weren't in anywhere very attractive. There was very little activity around our ship apart from these buses coming up during the day. Our vision of Buenos Aires was the city skyline and people in masks and suits wearing all the gear standing at the bottom of the gangway.
Which must have been quite disconcerting.
Very disconcerting. And we knew things were serious. We'd been watching the news, of course, and we've been watching, I think the US during these days went from 50,000 cases to sort of 60,000, then 75,000 cases. That's where it was heading. So on the 19th, a whole lot of people did go. Some were brought back. They did say if you get to the airport and your flights have been cancelled, you will be brought back.
So there were people who debarked and had to come back to the ship.
Absolutely.
Now, where were you during this period? You had not yet left the ship or made plans to leave the ship. So
we were not. No one was allowed off if they didn't have a flight. So you couldn't just get off the ship and disappear into the city. Absolutely. Only if you had a confirmed ticket were you allowed off, and then you were called to your buses and taken away. I don't know what the figures were, but quite a few came back because they got to the airport, their flight was cancelled, they had to wait for the buses, and they were brought back.
At this point, what is the mood of the passengers?
things are, lots of discussions. Some people just tried to ignore it. Others were desperately ringing family, desperately ringing their travel agents. So we're a group of about 350 British people. They were all in a tour group. They were supposed to get off in Buenos Aires. They were supposed to go to Iguazu Falls, all of that sort of stuff. So they were leaving it up to their travel agent back in England to try and organise their lives. There were lots of Europeans who were very nervous. There were 3 Italians on board who did not want to get off the ship. They did not want to go back to Italy.
Because at that point, Italy was quite bad.
Yeah, yeah.
And
said,
what was the mood of the crew, and what was their demeanour?
The crew were very good. They just carried on. It kind of, a lot of the time, it just felt business as usual. Everything on the ship was operational. You could go to the gym, you could go to the buffet, you could have your dining. Everything was operational on board. Lots of wiping of handrails, but they've been doing that anyway, keeping the place clean. That ship had 2 big wash basins outside the buffet area, and they absolutely insisted that everybody wash their hands and use the sanitizer every time they went in and out.
Yes.
So we felt quite comfortable being on board. We had, as I say, the flight for the 20th. On the night of the 19th, we'd gone to bed. And at midnight, we got the ding dong from the captain. Oh no, now what? And he said, the president of Argentina has just made an announcement. He has closed the borders. No flights in or out, no ships in or out, nobody. And within quarter of an hour, we'd set sail.
Oh my word, you must have been gobsmacked.
I know, he said, they told us we could stay, but we would get no services. There'd be no water delivered, no food delivered, no power given to us. I mean, what an option. So he literally charged up the engines and left. So then it was, okay, all right, now this is getting very serious. We've been refused, we've been thrown out, basically.
Yeah.
We now have a half full ship, but business as usual. So it made it very comfortable. You didn't have to wait for anything.
And still the buffets are open and people aren't wearing masks or any of that stuff that's now become de rigueur.
No, nothing at all. The weather was beautiful. It was starting to get warm because all the previous half of the cruise had been quite chilly. As we went down the Chilean coast, it got colder and suddenly we were in warmer weather. So you could life by the pool, the gym. It was literally business as not. And they kept saying, we're so lucky we are a healthy ship. There's no sickness on board. And people from home were sending us messages saying, stay there. You know, they were in lockdown in Australia. Already. And having cases and deaths. So the next port was Montevideo.
Back to Montevideo.
And we hung about outside for a long time, but then we were allowed in. And once again, we were told, if you have flights, you'll be able to get them. So, hence the $20,000 worth of airfares that we racked up. We got into Montevideo. There was absolutely no activity on the deck, on the port. No activity at all that we could see. And we thought, this doesn't look good. Then we got word that no one was allowed off. And that we realized a little while later that that was the day that the Ruby Princess in Sydney, which I don't know if you've had a lot of news about that, but it was allowed to dock on the 19th of March in Sydney, and it had a lot of cases on board, but the samples were sent off to be tested, and before the results came, the New South Wales Health Authority allowed all the passengers to disembark. And that brought a huge number of cases into Sydney and created, I think 17 people died as a result of that mistake. that news was big news at the time we were pulling into Montevideo. So I think that might have turned their thoughts against us. Here was another princess ship. We're not touching it.
Yeah, the Uruguayans are like, not so much.
Yeah. So all we did was refuel, and we were told that we were refueling and we were getting supplies, and we were now sailing directly to Miami, which is a long sail.
Yes, I know it.
And off we set. And as I said,
all sea days, no ports. So
no ports.
Platte River to Miami.
Yeah, exactly. It was something, I think we ended up with something like 24 sea days in a row.
That breaks my record. Mine was 10.
It was a little challenging at times.
A lot of bingo.
Well, they did say, after we left Montevideo, they said to us, again on a ding-dong, we no longer consider this a cruise. We are getting you home. We're getting you back to Miami. You will be refunded this section of your cruise. What they didn't say for a long time was, we will look after you and we will get you all home.
So you didn't know whose dollar or Australian dollar, pound, was going to repatriate you.
That's exactly right. There were 120 Australians on board. So we had a series of meetings in one of the spaces on board. I missed the first one because we didn't know about it, but I got to the second two. And there were lots of discussions about how we were going to get home, what people were going to do. And one thing we agreed was, whatever happens, we have to stick together. We are a large group. Therefore, we have some bargaining power.
And at some point, the Australian government will have to say, we're getting our people home.
Yeah. We had 2 emails from the Australian consulate in Washington, from the ambassador himself, who said, we are totally aware of where you are, what's happening to you. We're working on it. Don't fear. We're talking to Princess. We're talking to the American authorities. We're working on it. So that was some comfort. And then finally, a few days later, after the third meeting, the captain said in one of his announcements, do not buy any more airfares. We will look after you. Princess is going to look after everybody on board. No matter where you live, we will get you home. And that's kind of what we've been waiting for.
Yes.
For a long time. Again, it was beautiful on board. We were using the pool. We were heading towards the Caribbean. The sun was out. We were going to the gym. We were walking the deck. We were, life was normal. The only things that weren't normal.
Was there any sense of nervousness among the crew, some of whom I'm sure weren't repatriated for quite a while?
Do you know what? They were professional to the end. The crew, but probably an unfortunate expression that they were professional throughout. You never heard them mutter, complain, say anything about what was going to happen to them. They just did their job as they had been doing it. So the shops were closed, the casino was closed, the photography department was closed. The shows, they still did shows, not so often, but they were just repeating what they'd done in the last bit, because obviously nobody would be able to get on, get off, whatever.
Yeah.
And then the next thing we heard was we were in some doubt where we were heading, how we were getting. Was it going to be Fort Lauderdale? Was it going to be Miami? Where was it going to be? When was it going to be? Then one morning we got up and we went to the buffet. We were going to the buffet for breakfast, and it was closed. And there was a staff member there standing guard, basically saying, sorry, this area is closed. And we said, oh, why? And they didn't respond. We thought, okay, something's going on here. And we had noticed in the preceding couple of days quite a lot of the nurses with their bags in corridors. And then we noticed also twice people being moved rooms, which is kind of unusual activity.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
No word, nothing said. And then we went downstairs to the International Cafe, and we got 2 takeaway coffees and 2 bread rolls and took them back to our cabin and thought, there's something going on today. They're not telling us what it is. This is all very odd. And then it came to lunchtime, and we thought, we'll just go up on deck with this fresh air. We'll sit apart from everybody. We'll just get 2 takeaway hamburgers and sit at a table, which is what we did. And then we went back to our cabin. And within half an hour of getting back to the cabin, the ding-dongs came again. It was the captain saying, I want everybody to return to their cabins immediately. Don't rush, but go straight there, stop whatever it is you're doing, shut the door, and basically wait for further instructions. So we ended up, as it happened, with about 6 days confined to our cabins.
Oh my word.
And at that point, there was a note put under the door from the head doctor saying there'd been an unusual spike in the number of people presenting with flu-like symptoms, which at that stage is the best or the worst they could say, because obviously nobody had testing kits.
That's
I mean,
right.
look, America didn't have testing kits,
No.
let alone individual cruise ships at the far ends of the earth. So they suspected, obviously, what was going on. So then we went to Barbados. That was the next port. We're going to Barbados to pick up food supplies. And we thought, hang on a second, we've already picked up our food supplies way back in Montevideo. We haven't eaten that much. As it happened, we were confined to cabin. So from our balcony, we could see some port activity. And we saw one of our tenders disappear with crew in full coverings. As it happened, they took off samples, as well as a sick person. Yeah. And the captain told us that someone was taken off to hospital because they deemed it important they goes to hospital straight away and not wait till we got to
Miami,
wherever we were going to.
Yeah, at this point.
Yeah. So we learned later that, yes, they'd sent off samples, and it came back with, I think they sent 13 samples off, and it came up back with 8 passengers and 5 crew tested positive.
So it was on board the ship.
So it had got on board the ship. So this whole thing about us being a healthy ship, we don't understand at what point it got on the ship. Mm-hmm. Whether it had been lurking with somebody, crew perhaps, we don't know.
A delivery of food, there's no way to know.
No. Whether it was lurking from when we started way back on the 5th.
You and I both know that ports are very porous.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, pilots had come on board.
Exactly.
Twice, Buenos Aires and Montevideo.
Exactly.
Ship's pilots had come on board. People came back from the airport.
Yes.
And we spoke to one lady and her husband, and she said, we stood on the footpath outside the airport and people were walking past us, and we stood there for an hour waiting for the bus that brought us back to the ship.
Yeah, no way to know. No. So now after Barbados, how much longer before you got to Miami?
4 days.
And at that point, what happened?
Well, prior to that, we made a rendezvous with another princess ship. After we left Barbados, we made a rendezvous, and they said, we're picking up supplies. And we were thinking, I'm a little bit tired of this word supplies, because it could mean anything. And we could see from our balcony when we got close to the other ship, it had already disembarked all its passengers and was now basically sitting at anchor. So it had all its crew on board, no passengers, and they brought 3 tenders across to our ship, and I think they were bringing medical supplies.
Yes.
Extra medical supplies from their own stores. That's what I guess. We saw boxes being handed over, and it wasn't boxes of fruit or anything. It wasn't literally. Yeah. So then on the 3rd, I think it was the 3rd of April, which was a Friday, we're still not knowing where we're going to end up. We're very close to Miami. There was conflicting information on the screen. I had a friend from home who was following one of those ships apps.
Yes,
to tell you where you're going.
I was following all of my old ships too.
And I actually downloaded the app, but with the ship's internet, it took 4 days to download. But I finally got it. The good thing was they did give us free internet the entire time, and the new Medallion class internet on the Princess ships, it's pretty good. You know, it's as good as they can get on a ship. Yeah, basically. Still frustrating and difficult to do a lot of stuff, but we managed to book those airfares and get confirmations and things. So on the Friday, we still had no idea what was happening, and the Saturday morning, we woke up early, and I looked at the app, because the ship was still saying Fort Lauderdale on the screen. And I looked at the app and I said, I think we're going into Miami. And sure enough, about an hour later, we got the captain's call again, and we'd been given permission at the last minute to go into Miami because Fort Lauderdale had refused us.
Yes.
And it was a beautiful day in Miami, and we sailed past all of those huge ships.
Which are still there.
The Norwegians and the Princesses and the Carnivals all lined up. Yep.
I've seen the pictures. They're all still there.
Absolutely. And the crew on board all waving at us as we came in. And he did say also that overnight, unfortunately, 2 of the passengers had died. On
board your ship?
On board our ship. So we got in on the Saturday, and they said, all right, you just have to be patient today. We're working on everything that we can do. The first priority is to get the sick people off. And then secondly, we will disembark people who live in Florida. Not Americans in general.
Yeah.
Just the ones who live in Florida. So we spent the day watching ambulances come and go. That was all very, very, very slow. And we figured it was probably due to being a lack of ambulances, difficulty getting into hospitals when they arrived at the hospital. And we were watching people being taken off. And then ultimately, late in the afternoon, the people from Florida were getting off. All their bags were lined up on the dock, not in the building, but on the dock. There were people in full hazmat gear, head to toe, with backpack spray pumps, spraying all suitcases. And that ended the Saturday. And we said, well, we still don't know where we're going, what we're doing. We're here. And the Sunday morning, there was the ship had been pretty good with the food. They put it every night where we were locked in. They put a menu outside the door, so you could put it back in your little pigeonhole with what you wanted for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the next day. And on the Saturday night, we didn't get a menu. And I rang the front desk and said, we haven't had a menu. And they said, no, there isn't one. They were, oh, okay. Thank you. Sorry to ask.
You're beginning to get a wee bit testy, yes.
A bit testy. I mean, I felt so sorry for those guys at the front desk. They got hammered. The whole cruise, that there were queues at that desk every day, snaking out of the building.
I know, I've seen it. I've been there. My heart has gone out to the crew of all these ships, tens of thousands, at one point hundreds of thousands of crew, some of them still not repaid. There's several hundred. Just heartbreaking. I'm sorry, interrupt. So your last finally getting off.
Yep. To go about heartbreaking things, one of the the thing that really got to us one day, we were sitting having a coffee in the coffee shop. This is before we went into lockdown, because obviously after lockdown we couldn't talk to anybody. And we were sitting there having a coffee, and we said, well, you know, we're fit, we're able, whatever happens, happens, and we can deal with it. And we've got means at our disposal if we need them, you know. So we're in a good position, even though we don't know what's happening. And there was this lovely little old couple, and they were all always dressed immaculately, but sort of in the same shades of colours, you know, little greys and pinks and things. And she had one of those lovely grey plaits across the top of her head. And we saw them that morning walk past, arm in arm, and she was slumped with her head sort of on his chest, looking so sad. And we thought, how does a couple like that cope with this situation?
Yes.
We didn't know where they were from or, and you know, their story at all, but they were obviously travelling together, but not in a group. How did they get their head around trying to find airfares? You know, they would have had to join those queues. They would have had to have help all along the way. It was just, so that was being repeated everywhere. People got cross, obviously. We talk, you know, they're not telling us the truth, and there's more to this than they're letting on, and you know, it's not good enough, and we've got to do something about it. Other people were sort of thinking, well, while we're on ship, it's okay. And there were lots of foreigners who knew it was going to be really difficult to get home. There was a couple, young couple from, Arab couple from Dubai. And we chatted to them one day, and she said, we don't know how we're going to get home. There are no flights. Mm-hmm. How are they going to get us home? So Sunday morning, there was a knock on the door at 6 o'clock, and we opened it, and there was our breakfast. And it was a very poor breakfast. It was basically an egg McMuffin in a foil bag, yeah, and a Danish and a stone cold cup of coffee.
Yeah.
By then I get a bit nervous, and my stomach was not doing happy things, and I couldn't eat, and I was, you know, stressed. And I looked at this thing and went, oh no, I can't eat it. Did I live to regret that? Because about 8 o'clock we get a message under our door with our flight details on it. Out of the blue, piece of paper, flight details for that day. And we, oh my God. And so our suitcases had been put out the night before, but yes, that had happened once before in the cruise.
Yeah.
And they'd come back to us. So that didn't really mean anything. So the Friday night we put our suitcases out. Saturday morning, the Saturday night we put our suitcases out. Sunday morning we get this thing with the 2 flights for the Australians, Miami to San Francisco on Eastern, charter flight, and then United flight, again a charter to Australia. Now, and they said, just get ready in your room, be ready, you'll be called. So again, it was sit, wait, sit and wait, sit and wait, what's happening? Ultimately, we were called. They were literally calling people 2 by 2. So we walked through an empty ship to one of the lounges where we had a temperature check again. Yeah. We'd been given masks to wear when lockdown happened, which we had to put on every time we opened our door to retrieve our food. So we had to wear our masks, we had to wear gloves, and we basically walked. By the time we got to the gangway, there was a little queue. So we hardly saw anybody getting off that ship. And then we got our bags. We were taken on buses, police escort to Miami Airport, which was, we didn't even go into the airport. We were bussed to the bottom of the aircraft.
Fascinating.
And you could tell the airport was abandoned, basically. It was empty. You know? There were a couple of British Airways flights there, so I'm guessing that the British were also being looked after in some way, and British Airways was there. We made our own way up the stairs. We didn't have seat numbers. We just took a seat. And it wasn't a full flight. It was just the 120 Australians. Then it was a 6-hour flight to San Francisco. They did a drinks service,
Yep.
as in they brought out a trolley with soft drink on it, that's all. And the only food was little packets of Doritos,
Yeah.
Little kids' packets. So by then I'm beginning to really regret that I didn't eat my Egg McMuffin. And we get to San Francisco Airport, and again we walk through the tarmac and upstairs. There was a huge process at that airport that we had to go through, including sitting in a room of about 15 of us, spatially distanced on chairs, and then an interview with a doctor. There was a doctor and a nurse in a room. And so not only did they do the temperature check, but they actually chatted. And I said to Chris afterwards, I think they were talking to us like that as a means of working out whether we were really not sick.
Yes, yes, of course.
They could work it out. And then we checked in. There was a huge kerfuffle checking in because there were 2 flights on United that night, one to Sydney, one to Melbourne. And when they opened up for check-in, because we had, I think, 6-7 hours at that airport before the midnight flight, when they finally opened up check-in, there was a lot of discussion between them because there had been a sudden government change ruling from Australia where all cruise ship passengers who had to go into quarantine, which is what we had to do when we got there, were now going to Melbourne, whereas our ticket had said Sydney.
Yeah.
So they suddenly had to put commercial passengers
Yes.
onto one flight and the cruise on the other and swap everybody around. They weren't happy. It was a very horrible check-in experience. And then we discovered that on the Friday night, the cruise passengers, the Australians from there, I think it was the Volendam, which had come in with many, many, many more illnesses than we had and many more deaths. They'd been flown to San Francisco on the Friday and came out on the Friday night for their flight, and the United crew refused to work it. So they all were taken back to their hotel for 2 nights. And we ended up sitting next to one of them, and he said, oh, we were free to walk out. We went up the shops and bought things at the 7-Eleven and blah, blah, blah. And we thought, hang on a minute. We've all been in lockdown. We've all been in ships that have had illnesses on board, and they let you wander out in the streets? Yeah. So, and I'm sitting next to you.
Yeah, exactly. Nice.
And for us, that was the worst experience, was that 16-hour flight from San Francisco to Melbourne. 2 cruise ships packed on it, so it was totally full. We had to wear masks the entire time. We were supposed to wear our gloves, but I mean, 10 minutes of wearing those gloves and my hands are sweating and I'm just going, no.
Yeah,
But we did wear the masks. The crew, the United crew on that flight were fantastic.
I'll pass it along. The head of government affairs for United is a friend of mine. I'll pass this along.
Oh, well, please. They were fantastic. They made several announcements. They told us very happily that they had all volunteered to work the flight, that they felt privileged to be able to take us home. They were excited to have us on board. They apologized for the service because it was not much, because under the new rulings that had already come in. And even when we landed, the captain made an announcement saying, we're so happy that we've been able to bring you all home. So they were fantastic. But there was they didn't do tea or coffee or anything. They did some water and soft drinks. They did one little meal. So basically from the time we left the ship to the time we walked into our hotel lockdown for 2 weeks in Melbourne, it was a 40-hour journey.
So after, this is fascinating. I'm just up against my
Sorry.
No. This is the sort of thing that ship people and I have I have an audience of cruise people who would find this fascinating. Of course, I believe it was our mutual friend told me about this. And I of course, I'm very bad. I didn't acknowledge you were traveling with your husband, Chris.
That's right.
For how long have you been together?
34 years, I think it is.
So my husband Alfredo and I, we both travel a lot. We've both been on ship. We've been together 22 years. And I know the stress of just being sheltered in place in our home. It can be stressful. When Chris went through, I guess you really are going to make it another 33 years.
Look, I tend to be a little bit more, I get a little bit anxious much more quickly than Chris does.
Yeah.
And I fret on things, and then I don't sleep, and then I can't eat the next day. You know, it's not major, but I do get a bit stressed. He was amazing. He just took it all very, very, very calmly and very sensibly. And yes, we had some stressful, both together, we had went through stressful things.
Yeah.
But at no point was there an issue between us.
Yeah. So
absolutely no point.
Yeah. As we come to the end of this saga, which I played, after you quarantined, you got home. You're home in Sydney now. I have two final questions. One, how are things in Australia now?
Very good. We have got a little bit of a second wave happening. Our first wave, because the government acted very quickly and listened to the medical advice. We have a state, a bit like you, I suppose. We have a state system and we have a federal system. The federal system makes decisions for the entire country. The state governments make up, you know, for the state. They all talk to each other. Basically two parties. Some of our premiers are in one party, some are in another. The federal government's the Conservative Party. All of them have worked together, and all of them have there are federal and state health authorities with professors and doctors and experts in this field, and they are being listened to. And they are the first people you hear on the news each day. And they're the ones driving the decisions.
Well done.
It has been fantastic. So the first wave wasn't bad, and I think we just tipped the 100 deaths, which I know when you come from America, that just sounds like...
My husband is from Spain. He barely got back from Spain before it hit, and we had many close friends in Italy. And for March and April, we were watching the news in several time zones. It was difficult. But my last question, and I look forward actually to Alfredo and me meeting you and Chris, and that's what my next question, my last question is about. You're a travel pro. You love travel. Are you going to take another cruise?
I'm not in a hurry to be honest. I can't see the cruise season happening in Australia this year at all.
No.
To be honest. The first hurdle is the international flying. I can't really leave the state I'm in New South Wales. I can move around New South Wales. I can't cross over into Queensland. I can't cross over into Victoria, Northern Territory, Western Australia, South Australia, Tasmania. Basically, the borders are all closed between the states. International flying, Qantas has basically said there will be no international flying done by Qantas for at least a year, and then it'll be absolutely minimal. There's a restriction now on how many can fly into Australia. There are still flights coming in with other airlines, but there's a restriction on the number of people that are allowed in, and these are people that will have to go into quarantine. And there are Australian citizens, there's still about 18,000 Australian citizens anxious to get home who cannot get a flight because these flights are restricted to having 20 to 30 people on.
So there are still 18,000 Australians around the world that haven't been repatriated.
Absolutely.
That to me is, you know, as they say in the news business, you buried the lead. That to me is the thing that's most astounding about this interview.
Absolutely. And what's happening now is that because the Australian government has said, all right, we're only taking X number of people into hotel quarantine from now on, because the system's been overwhelmed. So the flights are now, they're having to bring in 20 people. So what are they doing? They're selling the business class at inflated prices only. So there are people who cannot afford the tickets. And of course, there's a huge demand as well. So it's a huge problem.
Well, listen, I have to go. This has been a fascinating conversation. I want to talk to you again. I look forward to meeting you and Chris when we can both fly.
Likewise.
We love
Absolutely.
Australia. Obviously, would love to see you in San Francisco or Palm Springs. But please, let's keep in touch. And please give my best and Alfredo's best to Chris. Thank you for sharing your story. And,
Absolute pleasure, David. I hope I didn't rabbit on too much.
no, it was fascinating to me. You know, there's ship people and air people, and we're both. So there you go.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Yeah.
It's a great pleasure speaking with you.
A pleasure, David. All the best to you. Again.